Sometimes the most unlikely heroes appear when we need them most. Sometimes a forgotten soul finds the courage to save another forgotten soul. On that bitter January night in Millbrook, North Carolina, 8-year-old Keisha Williams collapsed in the snow on Maple Street. Blood trickled from her split lip as cars passed without stopping. The little girl whispered words that would haunt anyone. "This is my last breath." But a stray golden retriever had been following her. When she fell, he pressed his warm body against her tiny frame and began barking with desperate intensity. His howls pierced the winter silence until they reached Della Morgan, a retired nurse on her front porch. What Della discovered that night would change 3 lives forever. The child was saved, but the mystery was just beginning. Why was this little girl walking alone in a snowstorm? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Della Morgan's arthritic hands moved with practiced precision despite the cold. 40 years of nursing had taught her that hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. She knelt beside the small figure in the snow, her weathered medical bag already open beside her. The child's skin felt dangerously cold beneath her touch, but she could feel a pulse, weak but steady. "Easy now, sweetheart," Della whispered, though she wasn't sure the little girl could hear her. The golden retriever refused to move, his amber eyes fixed on Della with an intensity that made her pause. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of family members who knew their loved one was fighting for survival. Della's fingers found the child's wrist, checking for circulation while her other hand reached for her phone. The 911 dispatcher's voice seemed too distant, too calm for this moment. "I need an ambulance on Maple Street, about 2 blocks from the hospital. I have an unresponsive child, approximately 8 years old, possible hypothermia and head trauma." The dog whined softly, pressing closer to the child as if he understood every word. Della had delivered babies, held the hands of the dying, and witnessed countless medical emergencies, but something about this scene felt different, sacred almost, as if she was meant to be here, meant to find them. When the paramedics arrived, their boots crunching through the snow, Della remained calm and professional. "Vitals are weak but stable. She's been unconscious since I found her. The dog was here when I arrived. He's the one who led me to her with his barking." The lead paramedic, a young man named Steve, whom Della had worked with during her hospital years, nodded with respect. "Thanks, Mrs. Morgan. We'll take it from here." But as they prepared to load the child onto the stretcher, the dog became agitated, circling and whimpering. "He can't come in the ambulance," Steve said apologetically. "I'll bring him to the hospital," Della said without thinking. "He's not leaving her side." The emergency room at Millbrook General buzzed with controlled urgency. Dr. Sarah Chen, a capable woman in her 40s whom Della had mentored years earlier, took charge immediately. The child was rushed into Trauma Bay 3, and Della found herself standing in the hallway, still holding the dog's makeshift leash. A length of rope she'd found in her car. "Any identification?" Dr. Chen asked during a brief break. "Nothing. Just this." Della held up a small pink button that had fallen from the child's torn coat, and this drawing in her pocket. The crayon picture showed a house with broken windows and dark, angry figures. Even without professional training, Della could see the trauma reflected in those simple lines. The hours that followed blurred together. X-rays, blood work, warming protocols. The child, who they were calling Jane Doe for now, had mild hypothermia and a concussion, but nothing life-threatening. She was alive, and that was what mattered. Della remained in the waiting room. The dog curled at her feet. Other visitors came and went, but she stayed. At 70 years old, she had nowhere else she needed to be. Her husband Robert had passed, and 2 years ago, and her children Marcus and Linda had their own lives in distant cities. The big house on Elm Street felt emptier with each passing day. "You don't have to stay," Dr. Chen said gently around midnight. "We'll call if there's any change." "Someone should be here when she wakes up," Della replied. She shouldn't wake up alone. Dr. Chen smiled, the same warm expression she'd had as a young resident. You always were the heart of this place, Della. When the child finally opened her eyes the next morning, Della was dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair. The dog, somehow sensing the change, lifted his head and gave a soft whine. The sound woke Della instantly. "Hello, sweetheart," Della said softly, approaching the bedside slowly. "You're safe now. You're in the hospital." The child's dark eyes darted around the room frantically until they found the dog. Only then did some of the tension leave her small frame. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "It's okay," Della continued. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. This is your friend here. He's the one who saved you. He wouldn't leave your side." Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, chart in hand. "Good morning. How are we feeling?" The child's eyes immediately went to the floor. She drew her knees up to her chest, making herself as small as possible. "Selective mutism," Dr. Chen murmured to Della. "Common in children who've experienced trauma." She may not speak for a while, but as they talked, something remarkable happened. The dog had somehow positioned himself where the child could see him through the window. When she spotted him, her lips moved again, and this time a whisper escaped. "Buddy." "Did she just—" Dr. Chen started. "Buddy," the child repeated slightly louder. "Is that his name?" Della asked gently. The child nodded, the first real response they'd gotten from her. Social worker Janet Mills arrived that afternoon, a kind woman with graying hair and tired eyes. She'd been handling child welfare cases for 20 years, and Della could see the weight of all those broken families in her expression. "No missing persons reports match her description," Janet explained quietly. "We've checked with surrounding counties. It's like she appeared out of nowhere." "What happens now?" Della asked. "Emergency foster care while we investigate. There's a family in Raleigh who can take her in temporarily." "What about the dog?" Janet's expression grew uncomfortable. "Animal control will have to—" "No." The voice was small but fierce. The child was sitting up in bed, her dark eyes blazing with the first real emotion they'd seen. "No, Buddy stays with me." It was the most she'd spoken since waking up, and the determination in her voice was unmistakable. "Sweetheart," Janet said gently, "I understand you love the dog, but he saved me." The child interrupted, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He walked and walked to find me. He can't go to the pound, please." Della felt something shift inside her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced since her own children were small. Without fully understanding why, she heard herself saying, "I could foster them both." Janet blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Morgan, that's very generous, but I'm a retired nurse. I have experience with children and medical needs. My house is plenty, big enough, and frankly, I could use the company." Della surprised herself with how certain she sounded. "At least until you find her family." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "If it helps, I can vouch for Mrs. Morgan's qualifications. She's one of the finest nurses this hospital has ever seen." The child was looking at Della with something approaching hope. It was an expression that reminded Della achingly of her own granddaughter, whom she saw maybe twice a year if she was lucky. "I'll need to do a home visit and some paperwork," Janet said slowly. "But given the unusual circumstances and the child's clear attachment to the animal—" "His name is Buddy," the child said quietly. "Buddy," Janet corrected with a smile. "Given her attachment to Buddy, I think we can make this work temporarily." That evening, as discharge papers were being prepared, Della sat beside the hospital bed. The child was dressed in donated clothes, jeans that were slightly too big and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Della asked gently. "Keisha," came the whispered reply. "That's a beautiful name." "I'm Della." "Miss Della?" "Just Della is fine. Or Grandma Della, if you'd like." For the first time since she'd been found, Keisha almost smiled. The drive to Della's house was quiet, except for the sound of Buddy panting in the back seat. Keisha sat beside him, one small hand buried in his golden fur. As they pulled into the driveway of the large Victorian home on Elm Street, Della felt a flutter of nervousness. What was she doing? At 70, was she really equipped to take care of a traumatized child and a stray dog? But as she helped Keisha out of the car and watched the little girl's eyes widen at the sight of the wraparound porch and the swing that Robert had built decades ago, Della knew she'd made the right choice. "Welcome home," she said softly, and was surprised to realize she meant it in every possible way. The first night was the hardest. Della had prepared the guest room that had once belonged to her daughter Linda, complete with fresh sheets and a lamp that cast warm light across the pale yellow walls. Keisha stood in the doorway, Buddy pressed against her legs, taking in the space with wide, uncertain eyes. "This is your room," Della said gently, "for as long as you need it." Keisha nodded, but didn't move from the threshold. Her small fingers clutched the crayon drawing that had been found in her pocket, the one showing the house with broken windows. Della had asked Dr. Chen if they should take it away, but the psychologist had advised leaving it. Sometimes children needed to hold on to pieces of their past, even the painful ones. "Buddy can sleep in here with you," Della added, seeing how the child's grip tightened on the dog's fur. That got a response. "Really? Of course. He's your protector, isn't he?" Keisha's nod was so small it was barely visible, but it was there. Della had laid out pajamas, soft cotton ones with little stars that a neighbor had donated. "There's a bathroom right across the hall. Fresh towels are on the counter. Are you hungry?" "A little." It was progress. Each word felt like a small victory. They sat at Della's kitchen table, the same oak table where she'd fed her own children breakfast for 18 years. Keisha ate slowly, methodically, as if she wasn't quite sure the food would stay available. Buddy lay at her feet, his head resting on her toes. "Can you tell me anything about where you came from?" Della asked carefully. Keisha's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Her shoulders tensed, and for a moment, Della thought she might retreat back into silence. Instead, she whispered, "A house." "What made it mean?" They yelled. "A lot." And Keisha's voice trailed off. She put down her spoon and reached for her drawing, smoothing it out on the table. "They said I was too much trouble, that I ate too much and talked too much, even though I barely talked at all." Della felt her heart constrict. "Sweetheart, you are not too much trouble. Do you understand me? You are exactly the right amount of everything." Keisha looked up with eyes that seemed far too old for her 8 years. "Buddy found me when I was walking. I was so cold and I thought I was going to die, but he stayed with me. Do you remember anything before the mean house? Grandma's house. It smelled like cookies and had flowers everywhere. But then Grandma got sick and went to heaven, and they said I had to go live with new people." The pieces were starting to come together, painting a picture that made Della's chest ache. A child who'd lost her grandmother, been placed in an inadequate foster home, and had run away into a winter night. Only the loyalty of a dog had saved her life. Around 10 o'clock, Della heard the first scream. She was in her own bedroom when the sound cut through the quiet house like a knife. Buddy's frantic barking followed immediately. Della hurried down the hall to find Keisha sitting bolt upright in bed, tears streaming down her face, her small body shaking with terror. "Shh, sweetheart, you're safe," Della said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Buddy had already jumped up and was pressing against Keisha's side, whining softly. "They were coming to get me," Keisha gasped between sobs. "The mean people, they said I had to go back." "No one is taking you anywhere," Della said firmly. "You're safe here with me and Buddy." It took nearly an hour to calm her down. Della ended up lying on top of the covers beside her, one hand gently stroking Keisha's hair while Buddy maintained his protective position on the other side. When sleep finally claimed the little girl again, Della remained there, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, marveling at how quickly this child had wrapped herself around her heart. The next morning brought Janet Mills and a clipboard, full of paperwork. She sat across from Della at the kitchen table, while Keisha and Buddy played quietly in the living room, or rather, while Buddy played and Keisha watched. "The home visit looks good," Janet said, checking boxes on her forms. "The house is certainly suitable, and your references are impeccable. Dr. Chen called personally to recommend you. What about finding her family? That's where things get complicated. Janet set down her pen and rubbed her temples. We've run her description through every database we have. No missing child reports, no family looking for her. It's as if she doesn't exist in the system. That can't be right. I've seen it before, unfortunately. Sometimes children fall through the cracks, especially if they've been moved between informal care arrangements. If her grandmother died and there was no formal custody transfer, you mean she's been lost in the system? Possibly. Or the people. She ran away from never reported her missing because they weren't supposed to have her in the first place. The implications of that settled heavily between them. Keisha wandered into the kitchen at that moment, Buddy at her heels, and both women fell silent. Miss Janet, Keisha's voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, honey? Am I in trouble for running away? Janet's expression softened completely. Oh, sweetheart, no. You're not in trouble for anything. You were very brave, but I left the house without permission. Sometimes, Janet said carefully, leaving is the right thing to do. Sometimes it takes more courage to leave than to stay. Keisha seemed to consider this. Will you find my real family? We're going to try very hard. In the meantime, you get to stay here with Mrs. Della and Buddy. Is that okay with you? For the first time since they'd met her, Keisha's face brightened with something approaching happiness. Yes, ma'am. After Janet left, Della showed Keisha around the house properly. The living room with its stone fireplace and built-in bookshelves. The sunroom, where her late husband Robert used to read his morning paper. The backyard with its ancient oak tree and the vegetable garden that had been dormant since Robert's death. Did you live here with your family? Keisha asked. I did. My husband Robert and I raised our 2 children here. Marcus and Linda. They're grown up now with families of their own. Do they live far away? Marcus is in Seattle and Linda's in Atlanta. They visit when they can, but it's not the same as having family close by. Keisha was quiet for a long moment. Then, were you lonely before I came? The question was so direct, so perceptive, that it took Della's breath away. Yes, she admitted, I was very lonely. Me too. Even when there were other people around, I was still lonely. But Buddy makes it better. Yes, he does. He has a gift for that. They spent the afternoon in comfortable companionship. Della showed Keisha how to make her famous chocolate chip cookies, and though the child mostly watched, she did help measure flour and steal chocolate chips when she thought Della wasn't looking. Buddy stationed himself strategically near the counter, hoping for dropped ingredients. Dr. Patricia Reeves arrived Tuesday morning. She was a child psychologist with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Keisha at ease. They sat in the living room, art supplies spread across the coffee table, while Della worked quietly in the adjacent kitchen, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give them privacy. Can you draw me a picture of how you're feeling today? Dr. Reeves asked. Keisha picked up a yellow crayon and began drawing what looked like a sun. Then she added a house beneath it, not broken this time, but whole, with windows that looked like eyes, and a door that curved upward like a smile. Tell me about your picture. It's the nice house, where I live now, with Grandma, Della, and Buddy. How do you feel in the nice house? Warmer and safe. It was the longest conversation Keisha had had with anyone besides Della, and Dr. Reeves seemed pleased with the progress. She's processing the trauma remarkably well, she told Della privately. The selective mutism is improving faster than I would have expected. I think the stability you're providing, combined with her bond with the dog, is exactly what she needs. That night, as Della tucked Keisha into bed, the little girl asked, Grandma Della, what if nobody comes looking for me? Della smoothed the covers and considered her answer carefully. Then we'll figure it out together. Sometimes families aren't the ones we're born into. Sometimes they're the ones we choose. Like you chose me, like we chose each other. Keisha smiled, the first real, genuine smile Della had seen from her. I like that better anyway. As Della turned off the light and headed toward her own room, she realized that for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't dreading another empty evening. The house felt alive again, filled with purpose and possibility, but she had no idea that their peaceful beginning was about to be tested in ways she never could have imagined. The rhythm of domestic life settled over them like a comfortable blanket. Della had forgotten how much she'd missed the small routines. Setting an extra place at the breakfast table, making sure the pantry was stocked with child-friendly foods, listening for the sound of small feet on the hardwood floors each morning. Keisha was an early riser, appearing in the kitchen each day just as the coffee finished brewing. She would sit at the table with Buddy at her feet, watching Della prepare breakfast with the intense focus of someone trying to memorize every detail. On their 4th morning together, she finally spoke up. "Can I help?" Della's heart squeezed with pleasure. "Of course, sweetheart. What would you like to do?" "I could set the table. Grandma taught me how." It was the first time Keisha had mentioned her grandmother without tears, and Della took it as a positive sign. They worked together in companionable silence. Keisha carefully placing the plates and silverware, while Della scrambled eggs and toasted bread. Buddy supervised from his spot near the stove, his tail wagging whenever either of them looked his way. The photo albums came out that afternoon. Della had been hesitant to share them, unsure if seeing evidence of the family that had once filled. This house might make Keisha feel more alone, but when she found the little girl studying the framed pictures on the mantelpiece with obvious curiosity, she decided to take the risk. "That's Marcus when he was about your age," Della said, settling beside Keisha on the sofa with a heavy album in her lap. "He was always getting into mischief." "He looks like you," Keisha observed, studying the photo of a gap-toothed boy grinning at the camera. "Everyone said that. And this is Linda. She was quieter, more like her father." They turned pages slowly, Della narrating the history of holidays and birthdays, first days of school and family vacations. Keisha listened with rapt attention, asking questions about everything from Christmas traditions to the lake house where the family had spent summers. "Do you miss them?" Keisha asked eventually. "Every day. But missing someone doesn't mean you're not happy. It just means they were important to you." Keisha considered this with the gravity of someone far older than her years. "I miss my grandma, but I'm happy here with you." "That's exactly right, sweetheart." The doorbell interrupted their conversation. Through the front window, Della could see a woman about her own age holding a covered casserole dish. Mrs. Chen from next door, she realized. No relation to Dr. Chen at the hospital, despite sharing a name. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Mrs. Chen said when Della opened the door. "I heard about your new house guest and thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal." Word traveled fast in Millbrook, especially news as unusual as a retired nurse fostering a mysterious child and her dog. But Della was grateful for the kindness behind the curiosity. "How thoughtful. Please, come in." Mrs. Chen's eyes went immediately to Keisha, who had positioned herself half-hidden behind Della's chair, with Buddy beside her. "And you must be the brave little girl I've been hearing about." Keisha didn't respond, but she didn't flee either, which Della counted as progress. "I brought my famous tuna noodle casserole," Mrs. Chen continued, apparently unfazed by the lack of response. "And I may have heard through the grapevine that someone might need some clothes in about size 8. She gestured toward her car, where several bags sat waiting. The kindness of neighbors, Della thought. It was one of the things she'd always loved about small-town life. The clothes proved to be a treasure trove. Jeans and sweaters, pajamas and undergarments, even a warm winter coat in deep purple that made Keisha's eyes light up when she tried. "It on. It's beautiful," Keisha whispered, running her hands over the soft fabric. "Purple was always my granddaughter's favorite color," Mrs. Chen said with a smile. "She's grown out of everything now, but I couldn't bear to throw them away. I'm so happy they'll get good use." After Mrs. Chen left, more neighbors appeared. The Hendersons from across the street brought homemade bread and offers to help with whatever was needed. Tom Bradley, the newspaper reporter, stopped by with a bouquet of flowers and barely concealed curiosity about the story behind Keisha's arrival. "I'm not looking to sensationalize anything," he assured Della. "But the whole town's talking about what happened. Some folks think it might help to get her story out there. Someone might recognize her." Della glanced toward Keisha, who was curled up on the living room floor reading a picture book with Buddy's head in her lap. The idea of exposing this fragile child to public scrutiny made her protective instincts flare. "I appreciate the thought, Tom, but she's been through enough. Maybe when she's ready." Tom nodded, understanding in his expression. "Of course. If you change your mind, you know where to find me." Dr. Reeves came by Thursday afternoon for Keisha's second session. This time, Keisha seemed more relaxed, chatting quietly about her new room and the cookies she'd helped make. When Dr. Reeves asked her to draw another picture, Keisha created an elaborate scene of stick figures and a golden dog playing in a yard. "Tell me about this picture," Dr. Reeves said. "That's me and Buddy and Grandma Della. We're playing fetch in the backyard. Buddy is very good at fetch, but sometimes he doesn't want to give the ball back. How do you feel when you're playing?" "Happy and not scared." Dr. Reeves made notes on her pad. "Do you feel scared other times?" Keisha's crayon stopped moving. "Sometimes at night, I dream about the mean house. But then Buddy licks my face and I remember I'm in the safe house now." "The safe house. That's what I call Grandma Della's house. Because nothing bad can happen here." After the session, Dr. Reeves spoke privately with Della in the kitchen. "She's making remarkable progress. The attachment she's formed to you is clearly helping her process the trauma. I'm impressed by how stable she seems." "She has her moments," Della admitted. "The nightmares are still frequent, and she's very anxious about being separated from Buddy, even for short periods. That's normal, given what she's been through. The dog is functioning as a security object for her. As she builds more trust in human relationships, that dependency should lessen naturally." That evening, Della's phone rang during dinner. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, and she felt a familiar pang of guilt. She'd called both her children when Keisha first arrived, but she'd kept the conversations brief, not wanting to deal with their inevitable concerns about her taking on too much at her age. "Hi, honey," she answered, gesturing for Keisha to continue eating. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, about you fostering this little girl." Marcus's voice carried the careful tone he used when he was trying not to sound condescending. "Her name is Keisha, right, Keisha? Look, I think it's wonderful that you want to help, but I'm worried about you. Taking care of a traumatized child is a huge responsibility. Are you sure you're up for it?" Della glanced across the table at Keisha, who was feeding small pieces of chicken to Buddy, despite Della's earlier instructions about table food. The sight made her smile. "I'm sure," she said simply. "But Mom, what if she needs more help than you can provide? What if there are behavioral issues or medical problems? And what about your own health? You're 70 years old. Marcus, I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite capable of caring for one small child. I did raise 2 of them, you know. That was 30 years ago." The words stung more than they should. Della took a deep breath, reminding herself that Marcus meant well. "Some things you don't forget, like how to love a child who needs it." There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Marcus sighed. "I just don't want you to get hurt, Mom. What happens when they find her real family? What happens when she leaves?" It was a question Della had been trying not to think about. "Then I'll be grateful for whatever time we had together. I think I should come for a visit, see how things are going." "That's not necessary. I'll drive down this weekend. Linda's been worried too." After she hung up, Della sat staring at the phone, feeling suddenly exhausted. Keisha's small voice broke through her thoughts. "Is someone mad at you because of me?" Della looked up to find Keisha watching her with those 2 knowing eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, no. That was my son Marcus. He's just concerned because he lives far away and worries about me. Does he not want me here?" The vulnerability in that question made Della's chest tighten. She reached across the table and took Keisha's small hand in hers. "What Marcus wants doesn't matter. This is my house, and you are welcome here for as long as you need to be. Do you understand?" Keisha nodded, but Della could see the seeds of doubt that had been planted. Another thing to worry about, as if she didn't have enough already. That night, as she listened to Keisha's breathing settle into the rhythm of sleep, Della found herself questioning her decision for the first time. Was Marcus right? Was she too old for this? What if she couldn't protect this child from any more pain? But then Buddy shifted position on the bed, moving closer to Keisha with the devoted protectiveness that had saved her life. And Della remembered why she'd taken them both in. Some things mattered more than age or convenience or other people's opinions. Some things mattered more than fear. By Friday morning, word of Keisha's story had spread throughout Millbrook like ripples in a pond. Tom Bradley appeared at the front door again, this time with a more pressing request. "Della, I know you said you wanted to wait, but I've got calls from 3 different news stations in Charlotte. Someone's going to cover this story whether we cooperate or not. Wouldn't it be better to control the narrative?" Della considered this while watching Keisha and Buddy through the kitchen window. They were in the backyard, Keisha throwing a tennis ball with the concentrated effort of someone, still learning to trust that good things could last. "What would you need from us? Just a simple interview. Focus on the rescue, on how well she's doing now. Maybe mention that you're looking for information about her family. Keep it positive. I'd have to ask Keisha, of course, and we'd keep her face out of any photos if you prefer." When Della presented the idea to Keisha over lunch, the little girl's reaction surprised her. "Would it help find my real family?" "It might, but only if you're comfortable with it." Keisha was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Buddy's ears. "Mr. Tom seems nice, and maybe someone will see it who knew my grandma." So that afternoon, Tom Bradley returned with a photographer and a digital recorder. They set up in the living room, and Keisha sat on the couch with Buddy at her feet, looking small but determined. "Can you tell me about the night Buddy found you?" Tom asked gently. "I was walking because I ran away from the mean house. It was very cold, and I fell down in the snow. I thought I was going to freeze, but then Buddy came and laid down next to me to keep me warm. He barked and barked until Grandma Della heard him." "Why did you run away?" Keisha's voice got smaller. "The people were mean. They said I was too much trouble and ate too much food. They yelled a lot, and sometimes they forgot to feed me dinner." Tom's expression darkened, but he kept his voice gentle. "And now you're living with Mrs. Morgan?" "Grandma Della," Keisha corrected. "She makes me breakfast every morning and reads me stories at bedtime. And she lets Buddy sleep in my room because she knows he keeps the nightmares away." "What would you like people to know about you and Buddy?" "That he's the best dog in the whole world, and that sometimes the people who save you aren't the ones you expect." After Tom and the photographer left, the phone started ringing. The first few calls were from well-meaning neighbors who'd seen the interview online, but then came others, reporters from regional papers, a producer from a Charlotte television station, even someone claiming to represent a national morning show. Della finally unplugged the landline and turned off her cell phone. "Are we famous now?" Keisha asked with obvious uncertainty. "I think we might be, sweetheart. Are you okay with that?" "I don't know. It feels scary. Then we don't have to talk to anyone else. We've said what we needed to say." That evening, Mrs. Chen appeared at the back door with a covered dish and news from the neighborhood. "The response to that article has been incredible," she said, settling at the kitchen table while Keisha colored nearby. "The church is organizing a collection of children's clothes and toys. The hardware store wants to donate a fence for your backyard so Buddy can run safely. And Millbrook Elementary called to ask about enrolling Keisha for the spring semester." The thought of school made Della's stomach flutter with anxiety. Keisha was making progress, but she was still fragile, still healing. Was she ready for the challenges of a classroom environment? "I used to go to school," Keisha said quietly, looking up from her coloring book. "Before Grandma got sick. I liked my teacher, Mrs. Garcia. She had a fish tank with angel fish." "What was your favorite subject?" Mrs. Chen asked. Reading and art. I wasn't very good at math, but Mrs. Garcia said that was okay because everyone has different talents. Della made a mental note to call the school on Monday. If Keisha was interested, maybe they could start with a gradual introduction, a few hours a day to begin with. Saturday brought Marcus, arriving in his rental car with the determined expression Della remembered from his teenage years when he'd decided she was making a mistake. He was 42 now, successful in his software development career, with 2 children of his own and a wife who sent lovely Christmas cards, but rarely called. Keisha was in the backyard with Buddy when Marcus knocked on the front door. Della watched through the window as her son's expression shifted from determination to confusion as he spotted the little girl throwing a ball with intense concentration. "Mom," he said when she opened the door, his voice already softer than she'd expected. "Marcus, you made good time." He hugged her and she was reminded of how much she'd missed having her children close by. But when he pulled back, his eyes went immediately to the yard. "That's her? That's Keisha." And Buddy. They stood there for a moment watching the simple scene of a child and her dog at play. Della could see Marcus processing what he was seeing. Not the burden he'd imagined, but a little girl who looked surprisingly normal, despite everything she'd been through. "She's smaller than I expected," he said finally. "She's 8 years old." "Marcus, they're all small at 8. Keisha must have sensed she was being watched because she turned toward the house. When she saw Marcus through the window, she immediately moved closer to Buddy, her body language becoming guarded. "She's shy with strangers," Della explained, "but she's come so far already." Marcus followed her into the kitchen, where Della began preparing lunch. She could feel him watching her movements, probably cataloguing any signs of frailty or confusion that would support his theory that this arrangement was too much for her. "How are you really doing, Mom? Honestly." "I'm doing well, better than I have in months, actually. But the responsibility, getting up with nightmares, making sure she's eating properly, dealing with all the emotional trauma." "Marcus, I was a pediatric nurse for 15 years before I moved to general medicine. I think I can handle one little girl. That was different. Those children went home at the end of your shift." Before Della could respond, the back door opened, and Keisha appeared with Buddy at her side. She stopped short when she saw Marcus, pressing closer to the dog. "Keisha, sweetheart, this is my son Marcus. Marcus, this is Keisha." "Hello," Marcus said, his voice gentler than it had been moments before. Keisha studied him with those serious dark eyes. "Are you here to take me away?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Della could see it in the way his face changed, the way his shoulders dropped slightly. "No," he said carefully. "I'm just here to visit my mom and to meet you." "Okay." Keisha remained wary, but moved toward the refrigerator. "Grandma Della, can I have some juice?" "Of course, sweetheart." As Della poured apple juice into a small glass, she watched Marcus observe the easy domesticity of the moment. Keisha's comfortable familiarity with the kitchen, the way Buddy positioned himself to be near both the child and Della, the simple routine of a request granted without fuss. "Grandma Della?" Marcus repeated quietly. "It started the first day. I told her she could call me whatever felt comfortable. And it doesn't bother you? The presumption?" Della turned to face her son fully. "Marcus, what presumption?" "She's a child who lost her grandmother and needed another one. I'm a grandmother whose grandchildren live 3,000 miles away. Where's the presumption in that?" Lunch was a careful affair. Keisha answered Marcus's gentle questions with growing confidence, telling him about her art therapy sessions with Dr. Reeves, about learning to bake cookies, about Buddy's favorite spots in the backyard. Marcus, to his credit, seemed genuinely interested rather than simply polite. "Do you like living here?" he asked. "Very much. Grandma Della takes good care of me and Buddy, and she doesn't yell, even when I have nightmares or when Buddy tracks." "Mud in the house. You have nightmares?" Keisha nodded matter-of-factly. "About the mean house, but Buddy helps. He sleeps right next to me, and when I wake up scared, he licks my face until I remember where I am. After lunch, Keisha retreated to her room for quiet time, a routine Dr. Reeves had suggested to help process the day's emotions. Buddy, of course, went with her. She seems very attached to that dog, Marcus observed. He saved her life, Marcus. The attachment is understandable, but is it healthy? What happens if something happens to the dog? Then we'll deal with that when it comes. But right now, Buddy is exactly what she needs. They sat in the living room, and Della found herself really looking at her son for the first time since he'd arrived. He looked tired, she realized, older than his 42 years. "How are Emma and the kids?" she asked. "Fine, busy. Emma's working full-time now that both kids are in school. I'm traveling more for work. It's just—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Just what? I worry about you, Mom. You're here by yourself, and now you've taken on this huge responsibility. What if something happens to you? What if you get sick? What happens to her then?" Della studied her son's face and saw something she'd missed in their phone conversations. This wasn't just about her capability or age. This was about his own fear and guilt. "Marcus, are you worried about me, or are you worried about yourself?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you concerned about my well-being, or are you feeling guilty that you're not here to help, and now I've found someone else who needs me?" The accuracy of her guess was written clearly on his face. "Maybe both," he admitted. "Oh, honey." Della reached over and took his hand. "Taking care of Keisha doesn't mean I love you and Linda any less. It doesn't mean I'm replacing the family I already have. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But seeing her call you Grandma Della, seeing how comfortable she is here, makes you realize how long it's been since you've been home." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I keep meaning to visit more, but work gets crazy, and the kids have activities, and it's expensive to fly everyone across the country." "I know, I understand. But Marcus, I can't put my life on hold waiting for visits that might happen. I can't stop living because my children have lives of their own." From upstairs came the sound of Keisha's laughter and Buddy's playful barking. Marcus looked toward the ceiling with an expression Della couldn't quite read. "She does seem happy," he said. "She is. And so am I. For the first time since your father died, I have a purpose that gets me up in the morning. I have someone who needs me. We need you, too." "Do you? When's the last time any of you called just to talk? When's the last time you asked for my advice or my help with anything?" Marcus flinched. "That's not fair. It's not meant to be unfair. It's meant to be honest. You're all adults with your own lives, and that's as it should be, but that doesn't mean I don't still have love to give." They were interrupted by Keisha appearing in the doorway, Buddy at her side as always. "Grandma Della, I drew a picture for Mr. Marcus, if he wants it." She held out a piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. It showed stick figures standing in front of a house, a tall woman with grey hair, a little girl with dark skin, and a golden dog. Off to one side was a taller figure with what looked like a car nearby. "That's you visiting us," Keisha explained to Marcus. "I put you in the picture so you'd know you're welcome here too." Marcus took the drawing, with hands that weren't quite steady. "Thank you, Keisha. This is really beautiful. Do you want to see my room? Grandma Della fixed it up really nice for me." "Yadi see." Della watched as her son followed Keisha upstairs, listening to the little girl's enthusiastic narration of her new space. When they came back down 20 minutes later, Marcus's entire demeanor had changed. "She showed me all her art therapy drawings," he said quietly. "Mom, some of those pictures, what that child went through, I know. How could anyone treat a child that way? I don't know, but that's behind her now. She's safe. You really think you can handle everything that comes with caring for her?" Della looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw not the successful businessman who questioned her judgment, but the little boy who used to crawl into her lap when he was scared. "Marcus, I raised 2 children largely on my own, while your father worked 60-hour weeks. I've handled medical emergencies, teenage rebellion, broken hearts, and college applications. I think I can manage one little girl who mainly needs love and stability." And if they never find her family, if this becomes permanent, then I'll be the luckiest woman alive. That evening, after Marcus had driven back to Charlotte to catch his flight home, Keisha helped Della clean up from dinner. "I like Mr. Marcus," she said, carefully drying a plate. "He seemed sad, though. Sometimes grown-ups carry sadness they don't know how to talk about. Like missing people? Exactly like that. I think he misses you from the mouths of babes," Della thought. "I think you're right, sweetheart. Maybe he'll visit again soon. Maybe he will." That night, as Della tucked Keisha into bed, the little girl asked, "Grandma Della, are you happy I'm here?" "Happier than I've been in a very long time. Even though I have nightmares, and I'm scared of lots of things, especially because of those things, because it means you trust me enough to let me help you feel safe." Keisha considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "I never had anyone who wanted to help me feel safe before, except Buddy. Well, now you have both of us." As Della turned off the light and headed toward her own room, she felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. Marcus would come around. She was sure of it. And if he didn't, well, that was his loss. For the first time since Robert's death, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Keisha's arrival. Della was folding laundry in the living room when she heard Keisha talking to Dr. Reeves in the kitchen. Not the usual whispered responses, but actual conversation. "The bracelet was Grandma's," Keisha was saying. "She gave it to me before she got really sick. It says K+ Grandma Forever because she had it made special just for me." Della paused in her folding, hardly daring to breathe. It was the first time Keisha had shared specific details about her life before the foster home. "Can you tell me about your grandmother?" Dr. Reeves asked gently. "Her name was Margaret, but I called her Grandma Maggie. She lived in a little white house with a big garden full of vegetables and flowers. She taught me how to make biscuits from scratch and how to braid my hair in 3 different ways." "That sounds wonderful. What happened to her?" "She got cancer in her lungs from smoking cigarettes when she was young. She said she was sorry about that, but she couldn't change it. The doctors tried to help her, but she got sicker and sicker." Della felt tears prick her eyes. Through the doorway, she could see Keisha sitting at the kitchen table, absently stroking Buddy's head while she talked. The leather bracelet, worn and cracked with age, was visible on her thin wrist. "What happened after she died?" "The social worker lady came and said I had to go live with the Hendersons. They weren't mean at first, but then they started getting angry about everything. I ate too much. I was too quiet. I asked too many questions. I didn't ask enough questions. Nothing I did was right." "How long did you live with them?" "I think maybe 3 months. They kept saying I was temporary, that they were just waiting for a better placement. But then they started talking about keeping me because of the money they got for taking care of me." Dr. Reeves made a note. "And that's when you decided to run away?" "I heard them talking about sending Buddy to the pound. They said he was too much trouble and cost too much money to feed. I couldn't let that happen. So I waited until they were asleep, and I took Buddy, and we left." "Where were you trying to go?" "Back to Grandma's house, I think. But I got lost, and it was so cold. Buddy kept trying to find warm places for us to sleep, but everywhere we went, people chased us away." Della had to sit down. The image of this small child wandering through winter nights with only a dog for protection was almost too much to bear. "How many nights were you outside?" "Maybe a week. I tried to count, but sometimes I fell asleep during the day too, so I got confused. Buddy found food in garbage cans, and sometimes people would give us things, but mostly they just told us to move along." "You must have been very scared." "I was more scared of going back to the Hendersons than I was of being outside. At least, with Buddy, I knew someone loved me." After Dr. Reeves left, Della found Keisha in the backyard, throwing a tennis ball for Buddy, with unusual intensity. Her small face was set in lines of concentration that looked too serious for someone so young. "That was a brave thing you did today," Della said, settling on the back steps. "Talking about your grandmother and everything that happened." Keisha caught the ball that Buddy dropped at her feet, but didn't throw it again. Dr. Reeves says it helps to talk about scary things, that they can't hurt you as much if you say them out loud. She's right about that. Do you think the Henderson people are looking for me? The question that had been haunting Della since the newspaper article appeared. I don't know, sweetheart. But even if they are, no one is going to make you go back to a place where you weren't safe. How can you be sure? Della wished she could make guarantees, but she'd learned long ago that children needed honesty more than false reassurance. Because I won't let it happen, and Janet won't let it happen, and Dr. Reeves won't let it happen. Sometimes adults have to fight for what's right, and we're all prepared to do that. What if they say I belong with them because they're my legal guardians or something? The sophistication of the question caught Della off guard. Where did you hear about legal guardians? I heard the Henderson people talking about it. About how they had papers that said they were responsible for me, and that meant they could make decisions about everything. Where I lived, where I went to school, what happened to Buddy. Della felt a chill that had nothing to do with the January air. If the Hendersons had formal custody arrangements, the situation could be much more complicated than she'd realized. That afternoon, she called Janet Mills. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, Della began. Is there any chance that Keisha's previous foster family has legal standing to reclaim her? Janet was quiet for a long moment. Why do you ask? Because Keisha mentioned that they had papers giving them custody. If they come forward now, let me do some digging. I'll make some calls to the counties we think she might have come from. But Della, even if they do have some legal claim, the fact that she ran away because of neglect or abuse would weigh heavily in any custody hearing. And if they deny the abuse, then it becomes her word against theirs, which is why it's so important that we're documenting her progress with you, her statements to Dr. Reeves, everything that shows she's thriving in your care. After she hung up, Della sat in her kitchen, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. She'd been operating under the assumption that finding Keisha's family would be the resolution to their temporary arrangement. She hadn't seriously considered that the family might be people who had harmed her. The sound of Keisha's laughter from the backyard drew her to the window. The little girl was teaching Buddy to sit and stay, rewarding him with treats and enthusiastic praise when he succeeded. The sight should have been purely joyful, but now Della couldn't help wondering how long they had before this peaceful interlude was shattered. Dr. Reeves called that evening after Keisha had gone to bed. I wanted to follow up on today's session, she said. The details Keisha shared about her previous placement are concerning. The neglect she described, combined with the threats to remove her dog, would constitute emotional abuse at minimum. What does that mean for her case? It means we need to be prepared for the possibility that her former foster family might try to reclaim her, and we need to have solid documentation of the trauma she experienced in their care. Janet's looking into whether they have legal standing. Good. In the meantime, I'm going to recommend that we increase Keisha's sessions to twice a week. The more we can document her statements about her previous treatment, the stronger her case becomes. If this goes to court. Court? Della's stomach dropped. Hopefully it won't come to that. But if it does, we want to be prepared. That night, Della lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Down the hall, she could hear Buddy's gentle snoring and the soft whisper of Keisha's breathing. Such peaceful sounds. But they felt fragile now, temporary. She thought about Robert and how he would have handled this situation. He'd always been better at the legal complexities, the research and preparation. She was the caregiver, the nurturer, but now she was going to have to be both. Around 2 in the morning, she heard Keisha cry out. Della was up and moving down the hall before she was fully awake, a response that had become automatic over the past few weeks. Shh, sweetheart, you're safe, she whispered, settling on the edge of the bed. Buddy was already pressed against Keisha's side, licking her face gently. They were coming to get me, Keisha gasped. The Henderson people. They said I had to come back because I belonged to them. You don't belong to anyone except yourself. Della said firmly. And you choose to be here with me and Buddy, and that's what matters. But what if they have papers that say I have to go back? Della smoothed Keisha's hair back from her damp forehead. Then we'll get a lawyer, and we'll fight. Those papers, because sometimes laws are wrong, and when they are, good people have to stand up and change them. Would you really do that? Fight for me? Sweetheart, I would move mountains for you. Keisha was quiet for a moment, then, I wish you were my real grandma. Who says I'm not? Family isn't always about blood, Keisha. Sometimes it's about choice. Sometimes it's about love. And I choose you every single day, even if it's hard, even if there are problems, especially then. As Keisha's breathing deepened into sleep again, Della remained sitting on the edge of the bed, watching over her. Tomorrow she would start making calls to lawyers, to child advocates, to anyone who might be able to help if the worst happened. But tonight, she would simply guard the sleep of this precious child who had wandered into her life like a gift she hadn't known she needed. In the morning, she would begin preparing for war. The call came on Thursday morning while Della was helping Keisha with her breakfast. Janet Mills's voice carried a tension that made Della's stomach clench immediately. We found them, Janet said without preamble. The Hendersons. They're in Polk County, about 2 hours from you. And Della, they've been looking for her. Della glanced at Keisha, who was absorbed in cutting her pancakes into precise squares, a ritual that seemed to comfort her. What does that mean? It means they filed a missing persons report 3 days ago. They're claiming she was kidnapped. Kidnapped? Della's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. Keisha looked up sharply. What's wrong? Nothing, sweetheart, just grown-up business. But Della could see the fear already creeping into the child's eyes. I need to call you back, Della told Janet and hung up. Who was that? Keisha asked, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Della sat down across from her, choosing her words carefully. That was Janet. She's been trying to find out more about where you came from, and she found some information. About the Henderson people? Yes, Keisha set down her fork entirely. They want me back. It wasn't a question. And Della realized that some part of Keisha had been expecting this moment from the beginning. They're saying they want you back. But what they want and what happens are two different things. What if they make me go? Then, we'll fight it. I told you that, remember? I meant it. An hour later, Linda called from Atlanta. Word was spreading through the family network faster than Della had anticipated. Mom, Marcus told me what's happening. I'm driving up this afternoon. That's not necessary, honey. Yes, it is. You're going to need support for this, and you're not facing it alone. By 3 o'clock, Linda was sitting in Della's living room, a successful marketing executive who had inherited her father's practical nature and her mother's fierce protectiveness. At 38, she was more diplomatic than Marcus, but equally determined when she set her mind to something. Tell me everything, she said, settling into Robert's old chair. Della found herself grateful for her daughter's presence as she recounted the past month. Keisha's rescue, her gradual healing, the growing bonds between all of them. Linda listened, without interruption, occasionally glancing toward the backyard where Keisha and Buddy were playing. She calls you Grandma Della, Linda observed. Yes. And you're okay with that? More than okay. Linda was quiet for a moment, watching Keisha attempt to teach Buddy to roll over. She looks happy. She is, finally. And you? I haven't been this happy since your father died. Then we fight for her. Whatever it takes. Janet returned at 4 o'clock with a family court lawyer named Sarah Hendricks, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in child welfare cases. The situation is complicated, Sarah began, spreading papers across Della's dining room table. The Hendersons do have temporary custody papers issued after Keisha's grandmother died. However, there are some irregularities in how those papers were obtained. What kind of irregularities? Linda asked. The social worker who placed Keisha with them has since been investigated for placing children in inappropriate homes in exchange for kickbacks from foster families who wanted the monthly support payments. Della felt a spark of hope. So they're Custody might not be legal, it's legally questionable, which gives us grounds to challenge it. But more importantly, we have Keisha's testimony about the conditions in their home, and we have clear evidence that she's thriving in your care. Doctor. Reeves arrived as they were discussing strategy, bringing with her a folder full of notes and drawings from Keisha's sessions. The child has made remarkable progress, she told Sarah. When I first met her, she was barely verbal with adults, clearly traumatized and exhibiting signs of severe anxiety. In just a month with Mrs. Morgan, she's become communicative, engaged, and is processing her trauma in healthy ways. Would you be willing to testify to that in court? Sarah asked. Absolutely. They spent the next 2 hours preparing for what Sarah warned could be a complex legal battle. The Hendersons had money and a lawyer of their own. They were claiming that Keisha had been manipulated into running away and was now being alienated from her legal guardians. It's not uncommon for abusive foster parents to claim parental alienation when children resist returning to them, Sarah explained. But we have several advantages. Keisha's age means the court will likely appoint a guardian ad litem to represent her interests independently. Her own testimony will carry significant weight, and the fact that she's clearly bonded with Mrs. Morgan will be considered. As the meeting broke up, Della found herself holding Robert's reading glasses. She'd taken to wearing them when she read bedtime stories to Keisha, though her own vision was fine. Somehow, having them on made her feel closer to her late husband, as if his wisdom and strength were flowing through her. We're going to need character witnesses, Sarah said, people who can testify to your fitness as a guardian and to Keisha's well-being in your care. The whole town would testify for Mom, Linda said immediately. She's helped half of Millbrook at some point in her nursing career. That evening, after Linda had settled into the guest room and the lawyers had gone home, Della sat with Keisha in the living room. The little girl was curled against her side, Buddy sprawled across both their feet, while Della read from Charlotte's Web, a book that had become their nightly tradition. "Grandma Della?" Keisha said during a pause in the reading. "Yes, sweetheart." "Ah, you scared?" Della considered lying, offering reassurance that everything would be fine, but Keisha had already been lied to and failed by too many adults. "A little," she admitted, "but not scared enough to give up. I'm scared too, but not of staying here. I'm scared of having to leave." "I know, baby. I'm scared of that too. Will Aunt Linda help us fight?" It was the first time Keisha had referred to Linda by a family title, and Della felt her heart squeeze with a mixture of hope and terror. If they lost this case, it wouldn't just be losing Keisha. It would be breaking apart a family that had formed itself from love and necessity. "She will, and so will Marcus, even though he's far away, and Dr. Reeves and Janet and Mrs. Chen next door, and probably half the town. Why would they do that for me? Because that's what people do when they love someone. They fight for them." Keisha was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I never had people fight for me before." "Well, you do now." Later that night, after Keisha was asleep, Della and Linda sat in the kitchen over cups of tea, planning strategy and sharing memories. "I keep thinking about when Marcus was 8, Linda said. "Remember how terrified he was of starting 3rd grade? You spent hours with him that summer practicing writing his name and reading simple books, building up his confidence. He was so worried about being behind the other children, and you never made him feel stupid or inadequate. You just loved him through it until he believed in himself again. That's what parents do. That's what you're doing for Keisha." Della nodded. "Except I'm not her parent. I'm just someone who loves her. Mom, love makes family more than blood does. I learned that from you." As they sat in the quiet kitchen, both women thinking about the battle ahead, Della realized that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about keeping Keisha safe anymore. This was about preserving a family that had healed them all. Keisha from her trauma, Della from her loneliness, and even Linda and Marcus from the guilt of having drifted away from their mother. Tomorrow, They would start gathering their forces, building their case, preparing for war. But tonight, they were simply a family, fractured and rebuilt, chosen rather than born, but real nonetheless. In the morning, the Hendersons' lawyer would undoubtedly argue that blood and legal papers mattered more than love and healing. But Della had spent a lifetime learning that the most important battles were often fought not in courtrooms, but in hearts. And she was prepared to fight for both. The discovery happened by accident. Officer Martinez from Animal Control had come by Friday morning to check on Buddy's registration and vaccinations, a routine follow-up that Sarah Hendricks had suggested to strengthen their case. But when he saw Buddy in the backyard, his expression changed completely. "I know this dog," he said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through photos. "We've been looking for him for months." Della felt her stomach drop. Looking for him. Missing pet report. Filed back in October by a Margaret Williams, said her dog Sergeant went missing from her yard. She was pretty broken up about it. Called every day for weeks asking if we'd found him. Keisha, who had been quiet beside Della, suddenly gasped. "Sergeant? That's not his name. His name is Buddy." Officer Martinez knelt down and gently pushed aside the matted fur around Buddy's neck. Hidden beneath the golden hair was a faded blue collar with a metal tag. "Sergeant Williams," he read aloud, 315 Maple Grove Lane. The address hit Della like a physical blow. Margaret Williams, Keisha's grandmother. "No," Keisha whispered, backing away from Officer Martinez. "His name is Buddy. He's my dog. He found me." "Sweetheart," Della said gently, her mind racing to process this revelation. "I think Buddy, Sergeant, belonged to your grandmother." "That's impossible. Grandma never had a dog." "The lady who owned the house before said she couldn't have pets because of her breathing problems." But even as Keisha protested, Della could see the uncertainty creeping into her eyes. Officer Martinez was showing them photos on his phone, pictures of a golden retriever that was unmistakably Buddy, standing beside an elderly black woman in front of a small white house. "This is Margaret Williams," Officer Martinez said. "She died in November, heart attack, according to the neighbor who filed the missing pet report after the funeral." "November," Della repeated. "How long ago did Keisha run away from the Hendersons?" "About 6 weeks ago," Keisha said in a small voice. The timeline was impossible to ignore. Margaret had died in November. Keisha had been placed with the Hendersons shortly after. Buddy, Sergeant, had gone missing around the same time. And then 6 weeks later, he had found Keisha wandering in a snowstorm. "Officer Martinez," Della said slowly, "how far is Maple Grove Lane from here?" "About 200 miles. Up in the mountains near Asheville. 200 miles. Buddy had somehow traveled 200 miles to find Keisha. "That's impossible," Keisha said again, but her voice was shaking now. "Dogs can't do that. They can't know where people are." "Actually," Officer Martinez said gently, "there are documented cases of dogs traveling incredible distances to find their owners. Their sense of smell and their ability to navigate is pretty remarkable." Linda, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "But if the dog belonged to Keisha's grandmother and she died in November, how did he know where to find Keisha?" "Maybe he didn't know at first," Officer Martinez suggested. "Maybe he was just searching, going from place to place, and he happened to pick up her scent when she was walking that night." But Della was thinking about something else entirely. "Officer Martinez, do you still have Margaret Williams's file? Her address? Any other information?" "I'd have to check back at the office, but I think so." "Why?" "Because I think we need to pay a visit to Maple Grove Lane. The discovery happened by accident." Officer Martinez from Animal Control had come by Friday morning to check on Buddy's registration and vaccinations, a routine follow-up that Sarah Hendricks had suggested to strengthen their case. But when he saw Buddy in the backyard, his expression changed completely. "I know this dog," he said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through photos. "We've been looking for him for months." Della felt her stomach drop. Looking for him. Missing pet report. Filed back in October by a Margaret Williams, said her dog Sergeant went missing from her yard. She was pretty broken up about it, called every day for weeks asking if we'd found him. Keisha, who had been quiet beside Della, suddenly gasped. "Sergeant? That's not his name. His name is Buddy." Officer Martinez knelt down and gently pushed aside the matted fur around Buddy's neck. Hidden beneath the golden hair was a faded blue collar with a metal tag. "Sergeant Williams," he read aloud, 315 Maple Grove Lane. The address hit Della like a physical blow. Margaret Williams, Keisha's grandmother. "No," Keisha whispered, backing away from Officer Martinez. "His name is Buddy. He's my dog. He found me." "Sweetheart," Della said gently, her mind racing to process this revelation. "I think Buddy, Sergeant, belonged to your grandmother." "That's impossible. Grandma never had a dog. The lady who owned the house before said she couldn't have pets because of her breathing problems." But even as Keisha protested, Della could see the uncertainty creeping into her eyes. Officer Martinez was showing them photos on his phone, pictures of a golden retriever that was unmistakably Buddy, standing beside an elderly black woman in front of a small white house. "This is Margaret Williams," Officer Martinez said. "She died in November. Heart attack, according to the neighbor who filed the missing pet report after the funeral." "November," Della repeated. "How long ago did Keisha run away from the Hendersons?" "About 6 weeks ago," Keisha said in a small voice. The timeline was impossible to ignore. Margaret had died in November. Keisha had been placed with the Hendersons shortly after. Buddy, Sergeant, had gone missing around the same time. And then 6 weeks later, he had found Keisha wandering in a snowstorm. "Officer Martinez," Della said slowly, "how far is Maple Grove Lane from here?" "About 200 miles. Up in the mountains near Asheville." 200 miles. Buddy had somehow traveled 200 miles to find Keisha. "That's impossible," Keisha said again, but her voice was shaking now. "Dogs can't do that. They can't know where people are." "Actually," Officer Martinez said gently, "there are documented cases of dogs traveling incredible distances to find their owners. Their sense of smell and their ability to navigate is pretty remarkable." Linda, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "But if the dog belonged to Keisha's grandmother and she died in November, how did he know where to find Keisha?" "Maybe he didn't know at first," Officer Martinez suggested. "Maybe he was just searching, going from place to place, and he happened to pick up her scent when she was walking that night." But Della was thinking about something else entirely. "Officer Martinez, do you still have Margaret Williams's file? Her address? Any other information?" "I'd have to check back at the office, but I think so." "Why?" "Because I think we need to pay a visit to Maple Grove Lane." An hour later, they were in Della's car driving toward the mountains. Keisha sat in the back seat with Buddy pressed against her side, staring out the window with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Linda had volunteered to stay behind to coordinate with Sarah Hendricks, but not before extracting a promise that Della would call immediately if they discovered anything important. The drive to Asheville took them through winding mountain roads that gradually climbed higher into the Blue Ridge Mountains. Keisha grew quieter with each mile, and Buddy seemed to sense something was happening. He kept lifting his head and sniffing the air, his ears pricked forward with attention. Maple Grove Lane turned out to be a quiet street lined with modest homes, most of them built in the 1950s and showing their age. Number 315 was a small white house with blue shutters, just as it had appeared in Officer Martinez's photos. The front yard was overgrown, and there was a "for sale" sign planted near the mailbox. "This is it," Della said softly. Keisha was staring at the house with an expression Della couldn't read. "It looks different than I remember." "How so?" "Smaller and sadder." They sat in the car for a moment, none of them quite ready to get out. Finally, Della turned off the engine. "Do you want to see if anyone's home next door? Maybe talk to the neighbor who filed the missing pet report?" Keisha nodded, though she didn't let go of Buddy's collar. The neighbor turned out to be Mrs. Patterson, a spry woman in her 70s who answered the door with obvious curiosity about the strangers in her driveway. "Are you here about the house?" she asked. Because the realtor usually shows it by appointment. Actually, we're here about Margaret Williams, Della said. This is her granddaughter, Keisha. Mrs. Patterson's expression immediately softened. Oh, honey, I wondered what happened to you. Margaret was so worried when they took you away after the funeral. They didn't take me away, Keisha said quietly. I went to live with some people because there was nobody else. Oh, sweetheart. That's not true at all. Margaret had everything arranged. She had papers and everything. Della felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of papers? Come inside, honey. I've got some things that belong to you. Mrs. Patterson's living room was cluttered but clean, filled with the accumulated treasures of a long life. She disappeared into the back of the house and returned with a cardboard box. I didn't know where to send these, she said, setting the box on the coffee table. The social worker who came after the funeral said she'd handle Margaret's personal effects, but she never came back for this box. Inside were photo albums, a few pieces of jewelry, and a manila envelope marked "Important" papers in Margaret's careful handwriting. Della opened the envelope with shaking hands. The first document was a will, dated 6 months before Margaret's death. It named Keisha as her sole beneficiary and specifically left instructions for her care in the event of Margaret's death. The second document was even more significant, a formal custody agreement naming Margaret as Keisha's legal guardian, signed by both Margaret and Keisha's mother before the mother's death 3 years earlier. This changes everything, Della whispered. The third document made her heart stop entirely. It was a letter addressed to Robert Morgan, care of Millbrook General Hospital. Mrs. Patterson, Della said carefully, did my husband Robert ever come? Here to visit Margaret? Oh yes, many times, especially during her cancer treatments. He was such a kind man. Drove all the way up here every few weeks to check on her, brought her medications when she couldn't get to the pharmacy. Margaret always said he was the best nurse she'd ever had. Della's hands trembled as she opened the letter. It was dated just 2 weeks before Margaret's death. Dear Robert, it began. I know my time is running short, and I need to ask a favor that might seem impossible. If anything happens to me, and if Keisha needs a place to go, I can't. Think of anyone I'd trust more than you and Della to love her the way she deserves. You've already given me so much care and kindness during my illness, and I know you have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. Keisha is everything to me, and the thought of her ending up with strangers who don't understand her gentle spirit keeps me awake at night. I know this is a lot to ask, but if there's any way you could consider taking her in, I would rest easier knowing she was with family, because that's what you are to me, Robert, family. With all my love and gratitude, Margaret. Della read the letter twice before the words fully sank in. Margaret had wanted Keisha to come to them, had specifically chosen them as her granddaughter's guardians. But Robert had died before Margaret, so he'd never received the letter. She loved that dog so much, Mrs. Patterson was saying, oblivious to the bombshell she'd just dropped. Got him from the shelter about a year ago after her cancer went into remission. Said she needed a companion for her last years. Called him Sergeant because he was so protective of her. Keisha was staring at the photo albums, tears streaming down her face. I do remember him, she whispered. I remember Grandma getting a dog, but I was so sick myself around that time. I had pneumonia, and I couldn't visit for weeks. When I finally got better, she said the dog had to go live somewhere, else because of her breathing. Oh no, honey, Mrs. Patterson said gently. She never got rid of Sergeant. She just didn't want you to get too attached in case something happened to her. She was trying to protect your feelings. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Margaret had kept Buddy, Sergeant, but had hidden him from Keisha to spare her another loss. When Margaret died, the social worker had either ignored or never seen the custody papers, placing Keisha with the first available foster family instead of following Margaret's wishes. And Buddy, grieving and confused by his owner's disappearance, had eventually escaped and begun the long journey to find the little girl he was meant to protect. How far is Polk County from here? Della asked Mrs. Patterson. About 2 hours south. Why? 2 hours. Buddy had somehow navigated from this house to the Hendersons' home in Polk County, found Keisha, and then guided her through 6 weeks of wandering until that final night when he'd barked for help on Maple Street. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't luck. It was love and loyalty, and a promise kept across 200 miles of mountain roads. Mrs. Patterson, Della said, gathering up the papers with shaking hands, would you be willing to testify about these documents, about Margaret's wishes? For Keisha? Of course, honey. Margaret would be so happy to know that Keisha ended up with people who love her. As they drove back down the mountain, Keisha sat with her arms around Buddy, Sergeant, whispering apologies into his fur. I'm sorry I didn't remember you. I'm sorry Grandma thought she had to hide you from me. I would have loved you even if... It hurt. Della glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Buddy licking away Keisha's tears with the same devoted gentleness he'd shown that night on Maple Street. They had the ammunition they needed now. Legal documents proving Margaret's wishes, evidence that the original placement had ignored those wishes, and a neighbor willing to testify to all of it. But more than that, they had the truth, that this unlikely family had been brought together, not by chance, but by the determination of a dying woman's love and a dog's unshakable loyalty. Margaret Williams had found a way to keep her promise after all. The box of letters sat on Della's kitchen table like treasure salvaged from a shipwreck. Sarah Hendricks had driven up from Charlotte the moment Della called, and now the lawyer sat surrounded by photocopies of Margaret's documents, her expression growing more confident with each page she reviewed. This changes everything, Sarah said, echoing Della's earlier words. Margaret Williams had legal custody of Keisha, properly documented and witnessed. The placement with the Hendersons was not only inappropriate, it was illegal. Marcus had flown in from Seattle that morning, his usual skepticism replaced by fierce protectiveness once he'd heard the full story. He sat beside Linda at the table, both of them reading through Margaret's correspondence with their father, learning about a friendship that had apparently meant the world to both participants. Listen to this, Linda said, reading from a letter dated 6 months before Robert's death. Dear Robert, I can't thank you enough for the extra time you spent with me during yesterday's treatment. When Dr. Chen said the chemo might not be working, I felt like my world was ending. But your kindness reminded me that even when we're facing our hardest battles, we don't have to face them alone. Keisha asks about you every time I visit her. She calls you the nice man who makes Grandma feel better. I think she's right. You do make people feel better, just by being who you are. Marcus wiped his eyes roughly. Dad never mentioned any of this. He wouldn't have, Della said softly. That's who he was. He helped people because it was the right thing to do, not because he wanted credit for it. Dr. Reeves arrived as they were organizing the documents, bringing with her a folder of Keisha's latest artwork and session notes. Where is she? She asked, noticing Keisha's absence. Upstairs in her room with Buddy, Della said. She's been quiet since we got back from Asheville, processing everything, I think. It's a lot for a child to absorb. Learning that her grandmother had planned for her care, that the dog she loves actually belonged to her grandmother, that she was supposed to end up here all along. It's like discovering she was part of a story she didn't know was being written. They spent the afternoon preparing for what Sarah warned could be an intense legal battle. The Hendersons' lawyer had been calling daily, demanding Keisha's immediate return and threatening to involve state authorities if she wasn't surrendered voluntarily. They know they're losing control of the narrative, Sarah explained. The longer Keisha stays with you and continues to thrive, the harder it becomes for them to claim she belongs with them. What about the fact that their original custody was based on fraudulent placement? Marcus asked. That's our strongest argument. But they'll claim they acted in good faith, that they provided care for a child who needed it. The fact that she ran away will be portrayed as typical rebellious behavior rather than evidence of abuse. Even with Keisha's testimony about the neglect, children's testimony can be powerful, but it can also be dismissed as exaggeration or manipulation by the current caregivers. That's why we need everything else. The medical records showing her improvement, the psychological evaluations, the community support, and especially Mrs. Patterson's testimony about Margaret's wishes. The doorbell interrupted their planning session. Tom Bradley stood on the front porch, his usually confident demeanor replaced by obvious concern. "I'm sorry to bother you, Della, but I thought you should know. The Hendersons gave an interview to Channel 9 this morning. It's going to air on the 6 o'clock news." Della's stomach dropped. What kind of interview? They're claiming Keisha was brainwashed into running away, that you're exploiting her story for attention, and that they're the victims of a media campaign designed to make them look bad. "That's ridiculous," Linda said immediately. "I know that and you know that, but it's going to be on television in 2 hours. I thought you might want to prepare Keisha." After Tom left, they gathered in the living room to watch the news. Keisha came downstairs with Buddy at her side, somehow sensing that something important was happening. The story led the local news segment. The Hendersons, a middle-aged white couple who looked perfectly respectable on camera, sat in their living room expressing their heartbreak over the kidnapping of their foster daughter. "She was a troubled child when she came to us," Mrs. Henderson said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "We tried to provide structure and stability, but she was very resistant to authority. When she disappeared, we were terrified that something terrible had happened to her. And now," the reporter prompted, "now we discover she's been living with a stranger who's filled her head with lies about us. It's heartbreaking. We just want our little girl back." Mr. Henderson leaned forward earnestly. "We're not perfect, but we love Keisha. We've provided for her, given her a home, followed all the proper procedures. To have her taken away by someone who has no legal right to her, it's devastating. What are your next steps?" "We have an excellent attorney, and we're confident that the courts will see through this manipulation and return Keisha to where she belongs, with us." The story concluded with a brief mention of Della's side, noting that she had declined to comment pending legal proceedings. Keisha watched the entire segment in silence, her small face growing paler with each word. When it ended, she looked up at Della with eyes full of confusion and hurt. "They said they loved me. Yes, they did. But they were mean to me. They said I was too much trouble. They were going to send Buddy to the pound. People sometimes say things on television that aren't true, sweetheart. Why would they do that?" It was Marcus who answered, his voice gentle but honest. "Because sometimes adults get so focused on what they want that they forget about what's right. They want to keep you not because they love you, but because losing you makes them look bad." "Will the judge believe them?" "The judge will listen to everyone," Sarah said carefully, "but the most important thing the judge will consider is what's best for you, and we have a lot of evidence that you're happiest and healthiest here with your family." That evening, the phone rang constantly, neighbors calling to express their outrage at the news story, former patients of Della's offering to testify on her behalf, even some strangers who'd been moved by Keisha's original rescue story and wanted to help. Dr. Chen from the hospital called personally. "Della, I've known you for 20 years. If that child is better off anywhere, it's with you. I'll testify to that in any court in the country." Mrs. Patterson called from Asheville. "I saw those people on the news, and I want you to know that Margaret would be spinning in her grave. She specifically said she didn't want Keisha to end up with people who would treat her like a burden instead of a blessing." But it was the call from Tom Bradley that surprised them most. "I've been doing some digging into the Hendersons," he said. "This isn't the first time they've had problems with foster children. 2 kids were removed from their home 3 years ago after allegations of neglect. The case was sealed because the children were minors, but I've got sources who remember it." "Can you prove it?" Sarah asked when Della put the call on speaker. "I'm working on it. But I thought you should know that these people have a pattern." After they hung up, the family sat in the living room, each lost in their own thoughts. Keisha was curled up in Della's chair with Buddy at her feet, working on a drawing that she wouldn't let anyone see. "Grandma Della," she said finally. "Yes, sweetheart, if the judge makes me go back to the Hendersons, will you still love me?" Della's heart broke at the question. "Keisha, honey, nothing could ever make me stop loving you, nothing. Do you understand? But if I'm not here, you'll still be my granddaughter. You'll still be part of this family. Distance doesn't change, love." "What about Buddy?" Buddy goes, "Wherever you go, that's not negotiable." Keisha nodded, but Della could see the fear still clouding her eyes. That night, as she tucked the little girl into bed, Keisha handed her the drawing she'd been working on. It showed a courtroom with stick figures, a judge behind a tall desk, two groups of adults on either side, and a small figure in the middle, holding the leash of a golden dog. Above the scene, Keisha had written in careful letters, "Please let me stay with my real family. This is for tomorrow," Keisha said, "in case I get too scared to talk." Della studied the drawing, noting the details Keisha had included: Linda and Marcus standing beside Della's figure, Dr. Reeves with her notepad, even Mrs. Patterson with her grey hair and kind smile. On the other side, the Henderson figures looked angry and dark. "You're not going to be too scared," Della said confidently. "You're the bravest little girl I know. But if you do get scared, you just look at me and remember that no matter what happens, you are loved. Will you bring Grandpa Robert's glasses tomorrow?" Della touched the reading glasses she'd unconsciously put on when they'd started reading bedtime stories. "Why?" "Because when you wear them, it feels like he's here too. And I think we're going to need all the family we can get." As Della turned off the light and headed toward her own room, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. Robert's glasses perched on her nose, her grey hair pulled back in the practical style she'd worn for 40 years of nursing, her face showing every one of her 70 years, but also reflecting a determination that surprised her. Tomorrow, they would walk into that courtroom and fight for the right to remain a family. They had law on their side, love on their side, and the memory of two people, Robert and Margaret, who had believed that some bonds transcended blood and legal papers. But tonight, she would simply guard the sleep of the child who had taught her that it was never too late to start over, never too late to love again, never too late to fight for what mattered most. In the morning, they would discover whether love was enough. The Millbrook County Courthouse was a stately brick building that had witnessed decades of family disputes, custody battles, and legal resolutions. On this Tuesday morning in February, it would host what Judge Patricia Hawkins later described as one of the most emotionally complex cases of her career. Della sat in the front row of the gallery, Robert's reading glasses folded carefully in, her purse and Keisha's drawing tucked inside her jacket pocket. Beside her, Marcus and Linda flanked the little girl who sat between them with surprising composure, her small hand resting on Buddy's head. The dog wore a red bandana that Mrs. Chen had specially made for the occasion, transforming him from a stray into what looked very much like a beloved family pet. Across the aisle, the Hendersons sat with their attorney, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit who kept shuffling papers and whispering urgent instructions to his clients. Mrs. Henderson wore a conservative blue dress and an expression of wounded righteousness, while her husband's face remained carefully neutral. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hawkins," the bailiff announced. Judge Hawkins was a woman in her early 60s with intelligent eyes and an air of patient authority. She settled behind the bench and surveyed the courtroom with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen every possible variation of human conflict. "This is an emergency custody hearing in the matter of Keisha Williams," she began. "I want to make something clear from the outset. This court's primary concern is the welfare of the child. Legal technicalities, while important, will not supersede what is in Keisha's best interest." The Hendersons' attorney, Mr. Davidson, presented their case first. He painted a picture of a stable, loving home, disrupted by a child's rebellious phase and exploited by well-meaning but misguided strangers. "Your Honor, My clients provided Ms. Williams with food, shelter, clothing, and educational opportunities for 3 months. When she disappeared in January, they were devastated. They contacted law enforcement immediately and have been cooperating fully with social services to locate her. And your position on the child's claims of neglect and mistreatment? Your Honor, my clients categorically deny any mistreatment. Ms. Williams was a challenging child who required structure and boundaries. Like many children who have experienced trauma, she occasionally resisted authority and may have misinterpreted firm guidance as harshness. Mrs. Henderson took the stand first, her testimony delivered in a carefully modulated voice that conveyed hurt and confusion rather than anger. "We tried so hard to help Keisha," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "She was difficult when she first came to us, wouldn't follow rules, barely spoke, seemed angry all the time. We thought structure and consistency would help her heal. Can you describe the child's behavior in your home?" "She was secretive and defiant. She would hide food in her room, even though we fed her regular meals. She refused to participate in family activities, and when we tried to establish reasonable boundaries, she would become sullen and uncooperative. Did you ever threaten to remove her dog?" Mrs. Henderson's composure slipped slightly. "The animal was not properly trained. It was destructive and unsanitary. We felt it would be better for Keisha to focus on adjusting to our family, rather than being distracted by a pet we couldn't properly care for." Sarah Hendricks rose for cross-examination, her approach calm but pointed. "Mrs. Henderson, you mentioned that Keisha hid food in her room. Did it occur to you that a child who had experienced food insecurity might exhibit that behavior as a trauma response rather than defiance?" We thought it was just stubbornness. "And when you decided the dog should be removed, did you discuss this decision with Keisha beforehand?" "We felt it was our responsibility as the adults to make that decision, without consulting the child, who had already lost her grandmother and been removed from everything familiar." "Objection," Mr. Davidson called. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Hawkins said. But her expression suggested the point had been made. Mr. Henderson's testimony followed similar lines, portraying himself and his wife as victims of circumstance who had tried their best with a difficult child. But under Sarah's questioning, cracks began to appear in his story. "Mr. Henderson, you stated that you provided regular meals for Keisha. Can you tell the court what those meals typically consisted of?" "Standard food, whatever we were having. And if Keisha didn't finish her meal, we didn't believe in waste. Children need to learn to eat what they're given. So if she didn't finish dinner, there was no alternative food provided?" "Children don't starve themselves. She would eat when she was hungry enough, even if that meant going to bed without dinner." Mr. Henderson's jaw tightened. "Sometimes natural consequences are the best teachers." The testimony continued for 2 hours, with Sarah methodically dismantling the Hendersons' portrayal of themselves as loving caregivers. By the time Mr. Davidson called his final witness, a social worker who had originally placed Keisha with the Hendersons, the damage was evident in the judge's increasingly skeptical expressions. "Your Honor," the social worker Ms. Rivera testified, "the Hendersons were approved foster parents with adequate facilities and references. The placement followed standard protocol for emergency situations." "Were you aware of Margaret Williams's custody documents and her wishes for Keisha's placement?" Ms. Rivera shifted uncomfortably. "Those documents were not in the file I received. I was told the child had no family and needed immediate placement. And you didn't think to investigate further?" "Your Honor, we were dealing with an emergency situation and limited resources. The Hendersons had an opening and proper certification." When Sarah stood for cross-examination, her first question cut to the heart of the matter. "Ms. Rivera, have you since reviewed Margaret Williams's custody documents and will?" "Yes, ma'am." "And in your professional opinion, should those documents have been considered before placing Keisha with the Hendersons?" "Yes, they should have. In fact, Following Margaret Williams's explicit wishes would have meant seeking placement with the Morgan family, correct? That appears to be correct, yes. As the morning session concluded, Della caught sight of Keisha's face. The little girl had listened to every word with an intensity that seemed far too heavy for her 8 years. When the judge called for a lunch recess, Keisha finally looked up at Della with eyes full of questions. Are they saying I lied about being hungry? No, sweetheart. They're saying they didn't understand what you needed. There's a difference. Will you tell them what I need? Della squeezed the small hand in hers. This afternoon, we're going to tell them everything. The afternoon session began with Dr. Reeves taking the stand. Her professional composure and detailed documentation immediately commanded the courtroom's attention. In my clinical opinion, she testified, Keisha presented with classic symptoms of complex trauma when I first evaluated her. Selective mutism, hypervigilance, food hoarding behaviors, and severe attachment disruption. These are consistent with prolonged emotional neglect and psychological abuse, and her progress since being placed with Mrs. Morgan. Remarkable. In 6 weeks, she has progressed from barely verbal to age-appropriate communication. Her anxiety levels have decreased significantly, and she's demonstrating healthy attachment patterns. This level of improvement is exceptional and indicates an environment of consistent safety and nurturing. Mr. Davidson's cross-examination attempted to suggest that Dr. Reeves's opinion was biased by her relationship with Della, but the psychologist's credentials and objective documentation made his efforts ineffective. Dr. Chen from the hospital followed, testifying about Della's 40-year nursing career and her exceptional skill with pediatric patients. If I had to choose one person to care for a traumatized child, it would be Della Morgan. She has an intuitive understanding of what children need to heal. Mrs. Patterson's testimony proved devastating to the Hendersons' case. The elderly woman spoke with quiet authority about Margaret Williams's explicit wishes and her careful planning for Keisha's future. Margaret spent months talking about what would happen to Keisha if she died, Mrs. Patterson said. She was very specific that the child should go to Robert and Della Morgan because they were the only people she trusted to love Keisha the way she deserved. And you're certain about this? Absolutely. Margaret showed me the letter she wrote to Robert. She said if anything happened to her, she knew Della would take care of Keisha like her own granddaughter. When Sarah called Della to the stand, the older woman approached with steady steps, wearing Robert's reading glasses and carrying herself with the quiet dignity that had defined her nursing career. Mrs. Morgan, how would you describe your relationship with Keisha? She's my granddaughter, Della said simply. Not by blood, but by choice, mine and hers. Can you describe her condition when she first came to your home? She was a frightened, traumatized little girl who had been failed by the systems meant to protect her. She was thin, anxious, and so afraid of being abandoned again that she barely dared to hope for kindness. And now, Della's voice grew warm. Now she's a confident, bright child who knows she's loved unconditionally. She helps me bake cookies, reads to Buddy every night, and has started talking about what she wants to be when she grows up. She's healing. What would it mean to you if Keisha were removed from your care? It would break both our hearts. But more than that, it would tell a child who has already lost so much that love isn't enough, that legal papers matter more than bonds of the heart. That would be a tragedy for any child, but especially for one who's just learning to trust again. Mr. Davidson's cross-examination was aggressive, questioning Della's age, her ability to keep up with a young child, and the sustainability of the current arrangement. Mrs. Morgan, you're 70 years old. What happens when Keisha becomes a teenager, when she needs guidance with issues that a woman your age might not understand? Mr. Davidson, I raised 2 teenagers successfully. I think I can manage one. More. And I have a family support system that many younger parents would envy. But surely you must acknowledge that this arrangement is temporary. that at some point Keisha needs a permanent home with people who can commit to her long-term.
Cara,
Della looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I would like to formally request permission to adopt Keisha Williams. I want to be her legal grandmother, not just her chosen one. The announcement created a stir in the courtroom. Mr. Davidson objected, claiming this was outside the scope of the current hearing, but Judge Hawkins allowed the statement to stand. Finally, it was time for Keisha's testimony. Sarah had prepared her carefully, but as the little girl approached the witness stand with Buddy at her side, the judge had granted special permission for the dog's presence. She looked very small and very brave. The afternoon session began, with Dr. Reeves taking the stand. Her professional composure and detailed documentation immediately commanded the courtroom's attention. In my clinical opinion, she testified, Keisha presented with classic symptoms of complex trauma when I first evaluated her. Selective mutism, hypervigilance, food hoarding behaviors, and severe attachment disruption. These are consistent with prolonged emotional neglect and psychological abuse, and her progress since being placed with Mrs. Morgan. Remarkable. In 6 weeks, she has progressed from barely verbal to age-appropriate communication. Her anxiety levels have decreased significantly, and she's demonstrating healthy attachment patterns. This level of improvement is exceptional and indicates an environment of consistent safety and nurturing. Mr. Davidson's cross-examination attempted to suggest that Dr. Reeves's opinion was biased by her relationship with Della, but the psychologist's credentials and objective documentation made his efforts ineffective. Dr. Chen from the hospital followed, testifying about Della's 40-year nursing career and her exceptional skill with pediatric patients. If I had to choose one person to care for a traumatized child, it would be Della Morgan. She has an intuitive understanding of what children need to heal. Mrs. Patterson's testimony proved devastating to the Hendersons' case. The elderly woman spoke with quiet authority about Margaret Williams's explicit wishes and her careful planning. For Keisha's future, Margaret spent months talking about what would happen to Keisha if she died, Mrs. Patterson said. She was very specific that the child should go to Robert and Della Morgan because they were the only people she trusted to love Keisha the way she deserved. And you're certain about this? Absolutely. Margaret showed me the letter she wrote to Robert. She said if anything happened to her, she knew Della would take care of Keisha like her own granddaughter. When Sarah called Della to the stand, the older woman approached with steady steps, wearing Robert's reading glasses and carrying herself with the quiet dignity that had defined her nursing career. Mrs. Morgan, how would you describe your relationship with Keisha? She's my granddaughter, Della said simply. Not by blood, but by choice, mine and hers. Can you describe her condition when she first came to your home? She was a frightened, traumatized little girl who had been failed by the systems meant to protect her. She was thin, anxious, and so afraid of being abandoned again that she barely dared to hope for kindness. And now, Della's voice grew warm. Now she's a confident, bright child who knows she's loved unconditionally. She helps me bake cookies, reads to Buddy every night, and has started talking about what she wants to be when she grows up. She's healing. What would it mean to you if Keisha were removed from your care? It would break both our hearts. But more than that, it would tell a child who has already lost so much that love isn't enough, that legal papers matter more than bonds of the heart. That would be a tragedy for any child, but especially for one who's just learning to trust again. Mr. Davidson's cross-examination was aggressive, questioning Della's age, her ability to keep up with a young child, and the sustainability of the current arrangement. Mrs. Morgan, you're 70 years old. What happens when Keisha becomes a teenager, when she needs guidance with issues that a woman your age might not understand? Mr. Davidson, I raised 2 teenagers successfully. I think I can manage one. More. And I have a family support system that many younger parents would envy. But surely you must acknowledge that this arrangement is temporary, that at some point Keisha needs a permanent home with people who can commit to her long-term.
Cara,
Della looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I would like to formally request permission to adopt Keisha Williams. I want to be her legal grandmother, not just her chosen one. The announcement created a stir in the courtroom. Mr. Davidson objected, claiming this was outside the scope of the current hearing, but Judge Hawkins allowed the statement to stand. Finally, it was time for Keisha's testimony. Sarah had prepared her carefully, but as the little girl approached the witness stand with Buddy at her side, the judge had granted special permission for the dog's presence. She looked very small and very brave. Judge Hawkins leaned forward with obvious kindness. Keisha, I know this is scary, but I need to ask you some questions. Can you tell me, in your own words, what it was like living with the Hendersons? Keisha's voice was quiet but clear. They were angry a lot. Not just sometimes, almost every day. They said I was too much trouble and that I cost too much money to feed. Can you give me an example? Sometimes, if I didn't finish all my dinner, there would be no breakfast the next morning. They said I needed to learn not to waste food, but I was never wasting it. I was just full. What about Buddy? Tell me about him. For the first time, Keisha's face brightened. His real name is Sergeant, and he belonged to my grandma. But I didn't know that then. I just knew he was the kindest dog in the world, and he loved me even when I was dirty and scared. And the Hendersons wanted to get rid of him? They said he was going to the pound. They said dogs were too expensive and I needed to focus on being grateful for what they gave me instead of wanting a pet. Is that why you ran away? Yes, ma'am. I couldn't let them hurt Buddy. He was the only one who loved me. And now, how do you feel living with Mrs. Morgan? Keisha looked directly at Della, and her whole face transformed with love and security. Grandma Della makes me feel safe. She reads me stories every night and helps me when I have bad dreams. She teaches me how to cook, and she never gets mad when I make mistakes. She makes me feel like I matter. Do you want to stay with Mrs. Morgan? More than anything in the whole world. She's my real family now. Her and Uncle Marcus and Aunt Linda and Buddy. We all belong together. Sarah nodded and pulled out Keisha's drawing. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this as evidence. Keisha drew this yesterday. Judge Hawkins studied the picture carefully. The courtroom scene with the small figure holding Buddy's leash, surrounded by people who clearly represented her chosen family. Keisha, the judge said gently, what does this picture mean to you? It means I hope you'll let me stay where I'm loved. Because that's what families are supposed to do. Love each other even when things are hard. Mr. Davidson's cross-examination was brief and unsuccessful. Every question he asked only reinforced Keisha's clarity about where she wanted to be and why. When testimony concluded, Judge Hawkins called for a brief recess to consider her decision. Della held Keisha close in the hallway, both of them trying not to think about what would happen if the ruling went against them. Whatever happens, Della whispered, you are my granddaughter forever. Nothing can change that. I know, Keisha whispered back. I dreamed about Grandma Margaret last night. She said everything was going to be okay because love always finds a way. 20 minutes later, they were back in the courtroom. Judge Hawkins had composed herself with the gravity befitting such a momentous decision. This case has required me to weigh legal precedent against compelling evidence of a child's best interests, she began. While the Hendersons did have temporary custody papers, those papers were obtained without consideration of Margaret Williams's clearly documented wishes and legal guardianship arrangements. Della felt her heart hammering in her chest. Furthermore, the evidence of Keisha's dramatic improvement in Mrs. Morgan's care, combined with her own clearly expressed preferences and the obvious bond she has formed, compels me to rule in favor of continuing the current placement. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration from Della's supporters, while the Hendersons sat in stunned silence. However, Judge Hawkins continued, I am not merely continuing temporary foster care. Based on the evidence presented, including Mrs. Morgan's request for adoption, I am ordering that custody be transferred immediately and permanently to Della Morgan, with proceedings for formal adoption to begin within 30 days. Keisha burst into tears of joy, throwing her arms around Della, while Buddy barked and wagged his tail. Marcus and Linda embraced their mother and new sister, creating a circle of family that felt both brand new and eternal. Furthermore, the judge concluded with a slight smile, I note that a certain golden retriever seems to be an integral part of this family unit. The adoption shall include permanent custody of the dog, known as both Buddy and Sergeant. As they left the courthouse into the February sunshine, Keisha walked between Della and Linda, while Marcus carried the bag containing Margaret's letters and Robert's glasses. Buddy trotted beside them, his tail wagging as if he understood that their long journey had finally reached its destination. They were home. 6 months later, the photographer from the Millbrook Gazette adjusted his camera one final time before taking what would become the most cherished image in the Morgan family collection. Della sat in the center of her living room sofa, wearing her best blue dress and Robert's reading glasses, which had become as much a part of her daily routine as morning coffee. To her right, Keisha perched with perfect posture in the purple dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her pick out for the occasion, her grandmother's silver locket gleaming at her throat. To Della's left, Buddy, now officially registered as Sergeant Morgan, sat with the dignity of a dog who knew his place in the world was secure. The adoption had been finalized in April, on a spring day when the dogwood trees were blooming, and Keisha had insisted on picking flowers for Margaret's grave. Marcus had flown in from Seattle for the ceremony, and Linda had taken time off from her Atlanta marketing firm to be present when Judge Hawkins made their family official in the eyes of the law. It feels different now, Keisha had said that night as Della tucked her into bed in what was now permanently her room, like everything is real. What do you mean, sweetheart? Before, even though I loved you and felt safe, there was still a little part of me that was scared it might end. But now I know it won't. Now I know I really belong here. The changes in Keisha over those months had been remarkable to witness. Dr. Reeves had reduced their sessions to once monthly, noting that the child's trauma symptoms had largely resolved. Keisha had enrolled in 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary in March, where her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, marveled at her academic progress and gentle nature with other students. She has a gift for helping children who are struggling, Mrs. Rodriguez had told Della during their first conference. Yesterday, when Tommy was crying because he missed his mother, Keisha sat with him and told him that sometimes missing people means they were really important to you, and that makes the missing hurt, but also makes it kind of beautiful. 8-year-olds don't usually have that kind of wisdom. Buddy had become something of a celebrity at the school, visiting twice a week as part of a new therapy dog program that Keisha had helped design. Children who were having difficult days would spend time with him, reading aloud or simply sitting quietly with their hands in his soft fur. The program had been so successful that 3 other schools in the county had requested similar initiatives. The most profound change, however, had been in Della herself. The loneliness that had shadowed her since Robert's death had lifted completely, replaced by a sense of purpose and joy that made her feel decades younger. Her own children had noticed the transformation during their increasingly frequent visits. "You're different, Mum," Linda had observed during Easter dinner. "Lighter somehow. Like yourself again." "I am myself again," Della had replied, watching. Keisha helped Marcus teach his children how to dye Easter eggs in the kitchen. I'd forgotten who that was for a while. The professional family portrait had been Linda's idea, a way to commemorate not just the legal adoption, but the miracle of how they'd all found each other. The photographer, a patient man named David, who specialized in family portraits, had spent an hour getting them positioned just right. "The lighting is perfect," he said, taking several final shots. "You can see the love between you in every frame." After he packed up his equipment and left, They settled in for their Sunday afternoon routine. Della read aloud from Little House on the Prairie, while Keisha worked on a needlepoint project that Mrs. Patterson had taught her during their monthly visits to Asheville. Buddy dozed contentedly at their feet, his graying muzzle resting on Keisha's ankle. The book was interrupted by the phone ringing. Tom Bradley was calling with news that still amazed them all. The story of Keisha's rescue and the family they'd built together had been picked up by national media, inspiring similar therapy dog programs in schools across 3 states. "There's a documentary crew that wants to interview you," Tom said, "but I told them you'd probably decline." "You're right," Della said, glancing at Keisha, who was listening with interest but no anxiety. "We've had enough publicity for one lifetime." "I figured as much, but I thought you should know. Your story is helping other children. The National Foundation for Animal-Assisted Therapy has started a program called Buddy's Kids in honor of your dog." After hanging up, Della found Keisha looking at her with an expression of quiet pride. "Are you proud that our story is helping other kids?" Keisha asked. "I'm proud of you," Della replied, "for being brave enough to survive everything that happened to you, and wise enough to know that love is worth fighting for." That evening, as was their tradition, they drove to the small cemetery outside town where Margaret Williams was buried. Keisha had chosen a marker for her grandmother's grave, simple granite engraved with "Beloved Grandmother Margaret Williams, 1945-2023, and below that, "Love finds a way." They stood together in the gathering dusk, Keisha placing fresh daisies from Della's garden on the grave, while Buddy sat patiently beside them. "Hi, Grandma Margaret," Keisha said softly. "I wanted to tell you about my new family. Grandma Della loves me just like you did, and she makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. Uncle Marcus sends me funny postcards from his business trips, and Aunt Linda is teaching me about marketing and how to be strong in business. And Buddy Sargent is happy and healthy and gets to help other kids now, just like he helped me." Della watched as Keisha knelt to adjust the flowers, her small hands gentle and reverent. "I think you'd like Grandma Della," Keisha continued. "She reads bedtime stories every night with Grandpa Robert's glasses on, and she never gets impatient when I have bad dreams. She says I'm not too much trouble ever, and that families take care of each other no matter what." Standing there in the quiet cemetery, surrounded by the peace of early evening and the certainty of love that transcended death and distance, Della felt the presence of all the people who had made this moment possible. Robert, who had befriended a dying woman and unknowingly set in motion the events that would save them all. Margaret, who had loved her granddaughter enough to plan for every possibility. Even the social workers and doctors and neighbors who had each played their part. In weaving this unlikely family together, as they walked back to the car, Keisha slipped her hand into Della's. "Grandma Della? Do you think Grandpa Robert and Grandma Margaret are friends in heaven?" "I think they're probably planning their next miracle," Della replied, helping Keisha into her seatbelt, while Buddy settled into the back seat. "What kind of miracle?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe helping another little girl find exactly where she belongs. Maybe making sure another dog knows just how to save a life. The best miracles usually look like ordinary love to people who aren't paying attention." As they drove home, through the streets of Millbrook, past the houses where neighbors had become extended family and the hospital where Keisha's new life had truly begun, Della thought about the winter night that had changed everything. How a child's whispered words about her last breath had somehow become the first words of a love story that would ripple outward for generations. Sometimes the most unlikely heroes appear when we need them most. Sometimes a forgotten soul finds the courage to save another forgotten soul. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we discover that family isn't about blood or legal papers or perfect circumstances. Sometimes family is about choice and courage and love that refuses to walk away. Sometimes family is about coming home to exactly where you were always meant to be.